Hola, soy Litzy La Bomba Dilene, boxeadora profesional de México, y estás viendo el show de Todd Atkins, en donde verás y escucharás a grandes talentos del boxeo. No te lo puedes perder.
All right, so it's Todd Atkins. I'm here with Lucas Cattell. I'm excited to have him on the show. I've had him on a couple of times. He's always a great guest, and this is more of a boxing discussion, which he does an excellent job on his podcast. I know Errol wanted to sign somebody to his pantheon of shows, but I think it should have been this guy, honestly. But teach their own. And Lucas, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself to people, and then I'm gonna kind of let him talk about this Conor Benn signing by Zuffa Boxing. So, Lucas, take it away.
Okay. Well, first off, I want to always thank you for having me on your show. Those are very kind
Yeah.
words. And, Chris Algieri and Dan that signed to that thing are really, really good at what they do too. So congratulations on their big opportunities. But I'm a boxing guy. I've been covering boxing basically at a high level, I'd say for realistically 5 to 6 years. And I've been around the sport for about 15 to 20. And I'm just someone who has strong opinions and tries to be realistic. I think and I'll stop a monologue here, but I think the hardest part is you have to keep a fan's perspective. And I think we're all fight fans to a certain degree. So you're not like not understanding what the fans want, but you have to be realistic, bitter, and kind of a bit normal and not trying to be braggadocious or think that you're superior than someone. And that's always my goal is to try to just be a normal person talking boxing and especially jumping into worlds like now MMA and all these different disciplines are now starting to intersect boxing. And I've always been
Mhm.
willing to have conversations because I just thought it was silly that there was a divide there because it's more similar than not. So that's kind of like an introduction to me.
Now, obviously the news of yesterday was this Conor Benn signing with Zuffa Boxing. So I just wanted to give you a chance without even interjecting anything to just kind of, I want your opening thoughts on what you think of this.
I think it's funny. I studied there, which was kind of funny. That makes me sound scared. I don't think it's as big of a deal as people think. And I think that's kind of the funny thing. I think that the reason it was a big deal is the perceived closeness of Eddie Hearn and Conor Benn and the symbolic nature. And I think that some of it stems from there's some fans who are about my age who were fans of pro wrestling and watched WCW take the WWE, and I think it's reminding them of them. And what I see it as is realistically, Conor Benn to me is not a top five fighter in any division. So he's more of an attraction. So it's not that wild that fighters that might fit a big name bill who are more of an attraction go somewhere where they can get the most money. And that's what it is. So I think that it might be shocking to some, but I mean, I'm not living and dying to see what Conor Benn does. So for me, it just felt like a logical progression. He spoke highly of Zuffa Boxing. And, he was recently at a card, Teofimo Lopez, Shakur Stevenson, where he was embracing Zuffa Boxing. So I think that people can maybe now look and see if they see people saying positives about Zuffa, they might end up under whatever umbrella. But it didn't really break me, and it kind of breaks me that some people are looking at this as a big deal.
I kind of felt the same way a little bit because I know Eddie Hearn probably wouldn't have paid him that number anyway. Even if he had wanted to, do another contract with him, he wouldn't have paid him 15 million for one fight, probably. So, if they're offering him that, then Hearn probably wouldn't pay him that, you know. Am
I
I off
mean, it's
base
just
there?
to me like, yeah, to me, it's like you've got Conor Benn, who I don't know, like, I don't see him as like one of the top guys in the division. I see him as like an entertaining guy, but it's more so about who can he bring in the viewership, controversial opinions, saying wild stuff. But if he were to fight Shakur Stevenson, I don't think anyone would be like, man, this is going to be a competitive fight at whatever weight. Shakur would more than likely beat him. So you're overpaying for a figure who might move the needle. But like you said, the market value probably isn't there in terms of achievement and where he stands in the division. So it doesn't shock me that he'd be willing to get overpaid to go somewhere and whatever the deal is. And that's the other thing, right? I trust all the reporters that put the reports out, but we don't know what the deals are, right? So it's always, you always got to speak with speculation and gray area because we don't understand. People could say it's a one-off, but we don't really know what this is. And I think that the real thing that shocked people was the symbolic nature of a fighter established by Eddie Hearn going to Zuffa Boxing, but that's business. This happens all the time. And there's probably going to be a fighter from Zuffa Boxing that doesn't do well and goes to Eddie Hearn and does well. It's going to be a give and take. And I think that's the thing. The one thing I want to ask you, I came on your show to ask you a question is I see a lot of legitimate MMA media viewing this as like a boxing takeover, that boxing is going to get overtaken by Zuffa and that boxing guys are being too nonchalant about this. And this is one of the things. And I'm one of the boxing guys that's nonchalant. I don't see this as a takeover because it's just too fragmented. Like, think about how lame boxing would have been and the lack of creativity if all it took was some money and just putting a plan together to make boxing more uh, unison and together. I just don't see it. I think it's undermining how fragmented the sport is, and it's possibly bringing baggage in from MMA when MMA was like coming up and it was trying to become a sport to a certain extent. From my knowledge of it, it was more of an outlaw thing, and there was more opportunities to kind of be the big dog in town. I just feel like boxing has such a historical run of all these legacy promoters and the moments they've created. It's harder to do that.
What I think is happening is, at least amongst MMA media types, is they're thinking, oh my God, they're doing it again. They did this in MMA. They went out and they wiped out everybody really quickly. Not really quickly, but, over a period of years. But it was a little bit different in that there was no one established at that time. So they were just buying up organizations that were trying to come up, not above them already. So it's different in boxing, but I think they feel like, oh my God, that's what they're getting ready to do. They're getting ready to wipe out everybody. Eddie Hearn's finished now. I think they're overvaluing Conor Benn completely, like you were saying. Him losing Conor Benn is not going to break him, but what they're thinking is they're going to get this guy next, and this guy next, and this guy next, and then Eddie's going to be done.
Well, I think that there's going to be some signings that really shake up the world. And this isn't one of them to me. Like, I think that there's going to be possibly a world where maybe they have seven of the best 10 fighters. But then here's another thing to think about. How many great fighters are out there that don't get opportunities, that might get opportunities when those fighters go to this whatever it is? Boxing and MMA and jujitsu and everything have a lot of people who are good and very few opportunities. So I view this as a really exciting time because a lot of hidden gems might get opportunities to perform, to elevate and shine. So I think that boxing has been too much a pattern of like cultural norms. This is the way we run things. And what's kind of neat about this is a disruptor came in and changed the whole game. And now we are getting better matchups. We're getting things shaken up. And now fighters that might not get opportunities are going to get opportunities. So I think that it's going to be a refreshing reset for the sport to possibly move forward.
Yeah, and the other thing, it's interesting timing because like last week, Eddie Hearn was ripping on. He was really embarrassing Dana White kind of way when he was giving his analysis of the first four Zuffa boxing shows and really just tearing them apart. And I think he said something that was interesting during that. He said, I know Turkey Al Sheikh, and he can't be happy with this. This is not the kind of level of thing he wants. He expects the best. He expects the best fighters, the best production, the best matchups, the highest level. And these shows are crap, basically, is what he was saying. And he's like, this is not what he wants, you know. And then a week later, they sign, even a couple of days later, they overpay for Conor Benn because no one else would have paid him that. So did Eddie's attacks influence this decision, you think, or no?
Who knows? Like once again, this is speculative, and you don't know how this stuff goes because you
Right.
don't know the deals in place, and like who knows? But for a fan looking in, it creates a narrative pathway to the sport of boxing that I think boxing has been lacking. So if you're interested in this stuff, now you can follow these type of stories along with the fights. And honestly, that type of stuff is probably more interesting than Conor Benn's career at this point. Conor Benn is someone who's been relatively inactive. We're not completely sure what weight class he fights at, and he's just a strong personality coming off a win over a fighter in a legacy bout where he went 1-1, and he was calling out a junior welterweight champion, and he had just recently fought, I believe, at middleweight or junior middle some. So it's like there's nothing logical about his career. It's more about show, move the needle, etc. And that's what this is. It's a move the needle thing. So I don't know if Eddie's words directly, who knows? I just think that there's going to be a lot of talking. And if the best thing you can do is if you enjoy the talking, listen. But I tend not to listen to it because they're just going to be saying stuff.
I think Conor Benn's kind of in a hard spot as a fighter because he's too small to be really the cream of the crop at 160 like you're talking about. And I don't think he's skilled enough to be the cream of the crop at like 154. So he's kind of in a difficult spot as terms of what you do with him. You know what I mean? He can draw attention like you talked about. But is he a long-term play for you because of his size at 160 and skill at 154? They're probably more skilled, I would say,
But
than him.
I'll throw it back
The
at you,
best
right?
guys.
So if you were to overpay for someone like this, in my opinion, you'd probably overpay for other guys that are coming to beat him, right? Because he'll be the big name that the other guys come and then he's the credible win moving
Hmm.
forward. I don't see him as a sustainable. Now he could have attraction bouts, good fights, but I view him as if there's up and comers coming in, you could match him with any of those guys, and more than likely they probably win those fights. And then, Conor Benn is, oh my God, they beat Conor Benn. And some of these fighters, I don't know, it probably is like this in MMA. I haven't followed MMA in a long time. But in boxing in particular, man, there are certain fighters where people just accept a certain quality to them and they can't even really tell you why. And it's mostly marketing, but the Conor Benn kind of fits that mold where they're like, man, he beat Conor Benn. And if you asked them, why did you beat like, what does that mean? They can't really put their finger on it, but it really means something. And, I think that that's more of the value of this one is I think that it possibly sets the stage for future big signings. And it's like a carrot for those big signings is this is a big fight. We could go to the UK or whatever. Who knows where they'll go, but that's the way I see it.
Yeah, some people have brought up like UK TV deal, but if I'm a TV entity, if you only have them for one fight, why do I want to give you a deal?
Well, that goes down to those contracts where like there has to who knows what the contracts say,
Right.
right? Because it's like we're hearing it's a one-off, but like until you know what a contract is, until you understand what's in place, to me what this and this is just my interpretation, I interpret this as Conor Benn is going to be fighting in the Riyadh season world. So he's going to be on Ring magazine cards and he's going to be on probably show up at Zuffa events. He might fight in one Zuffa event, but it's more so like that's the universe he's going to be in. And what I'm curious about is will Zuffa slowly start to be the lead promoter for Ring magazine cards? And will Matchroom and these other promoters that would sometimes work as the promoter no longer be involved in those? I think that's a fascinating thing to follow because this might be the start of maybe a change if that were to happen.
You just brought up something interesting because they've been doing these Apex shows. And they made it a point to say Conor Benn signed with Zuffa Boxing, not Riyadh season. So maybe what you're saying is true. Maybe they're going to go away from what Zuffa Boxing has been for these first four shows. Not immediately, but, you know, in the near future, maybe next 6 months to a year. where they won't be having these little small events. They're going to be the promoter for Riyadh season. It'll be called Zuffa Boxing.
Maybe. I just think that like everyone, there's a lot of people, right? And I'm pretty open-minded to Zuffa boxing because I like boxing and I want the sport to do well. There's a lot of people that are looking at it, looking to fail. And these early cards are not going to be what Zuffa boxing
Right.
is. You know, it's like this is them dress rehearsing. I think next January is a good way to look at where the company is going. They're trying things out. They're seeing how the weigh-ins work. Sometimes the weigh-ins have been live streamed, sometimes they're not. And there's cultural norms that are different. A UFC press conference is different than a boxing press conference. So I'm curious to see how those are presented because there's just a certain level of boxing fan doesn't want that. And it's not that it's good or bad. It's just like there's norms, there's cultural. It's the same way if I did an MMA event, but I did it the way boxing puts together a media workout or a press conference, there'd be MMA fans that would go, "This looks janky," and then vice versa. If you do a press conference the way the UFC does it, I'm sure there'd be boxing fans that goes, "I don't like this." It's just there's undertones to the environment, and I think they're figuring out where they sit. And probably October, November, we'll have a good feel of what Zuffa boxing wants to be.
Maybe it'll be Riyadh season present Zuffa Boxing or something like that, where it's a meld of a combination into one entity.
Yeah, I don't know how it'll be, but I think it's like the same. I keep thinking of it as like a universe. People always talk about the Marvel universe. I don't really like Marvel movies, but that's a different conversation. But I think that it'll exist in a similar place. So who knows what Zuffa Boxing is, if it's a developmental series. I think that's one thing that I'm looking at is there tiers of shows, right? With Zuffa Boxing, is there the Apex or the Meta Apex shows where it's like developmental guys that are trying to make a name, and then is there shows that are like a Conor Benn show that are on the road? Like,
It
are
could
there
be like that because the UFC does that. They have shows on the Apex, and then they have their bigger shows on the road, like you're talking about. So maybe I could see it doing that. Maybe I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No,
yeah,
go for it.
the UFC is doing that. Has been doing that for a while now. For several years, where they have UFC Apex cards is what they call them. UFC Apex cards. Then they have UFC Fight Night cards. Some of those are out in the city somewhere or Apex. And then they have their numbered events, which are their pay-per-views, but they're no longer doing pay-per-views. So maybe it would be, like you said, something like that.
And I think that like really to have, if they really want to try to corner the market, they need like a mid-tier level. So you need like a developmental card, which these Sunday cards can maybe fit that bill, but they might be a little higher than that. And then you need that mid-level of a guy who maybe fought on the prelims or early on these cards on the afternoon Sundays, and then they make the jump. And now they're a mid-tier main event fighter. And if they can have success at that mid-level, then that's when maybe the show hits the road or they go and fight a distinguished champion or whatever. But like really to have a strong promotion, you have to have like different tiers of fights and fight events. And I think the other tricky thing is Ben is not going to be a big deal in the US. He just isn't. He's going to be a big deal in the UK. It's going to be tricky to try to make him a US guy. He has to be a UK guy because I remember they did a fight with Pete Dobson in the US and it was really early on, just came and went. So I think an underrated part of boxing is the marketplaces and entering specific markets and understanding how to make things work in different places. Like if you go to Australia with Jai Opetaia, you've really got to understand that market. You can't just go in and do a show the way you would do. I think you have to find the people that can move the tickets, figure out the grassroots connections, and really kind of build some momentum to those shows. Same with the UK. And that's something I'm looking to see is the infrastructure stuff, is how do they look to build momentum? Because the one thing I am noticing on kind of a hater standpoint, but it isn't, it's just noticing, the fans of the other products, the UFC and the WWE, when there's simulcast live streaming, they're not tuning into these weigh-ins. They're not fascinated. So far they haven't had that fighter who can pull in audience members from other things. And all it takes is one person, and then that can do it. But I think it's interesting. Another thing I want to throw at you is Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano. It doesn't mean much to me, but like, how does that fit into this, right? Because it's like they're signing Conor Benn. There's this big group behind Zuffa Boxing, and then here's possibly Jake Paul putting on like a big MMA fight that's not. I'd imagine it's not all that relevant anymore, but it's like two really famous people fighting on a big platform. Does that factor into this at all?
Into this signing, you mean?
Just into this universe of like
Hmm.
of just how this is going to play out, because it does feel like there's a competition of like eyeballs and attraction, and cloud is currency, and it feels like that move, I wouldn't say weakened the UFC, but it made people question what are the big enticing fights that are out there. And I think that's kind of the question people have for Zuffa Boxing is Jai Opetaia, Brandon Glanton. That's a good fight, but it's not an enticing fight. It's not like, man, I got to order an extra large pizza and eat it all in one sitting. And who's going to be the dancing partner for Conor Benn? And we could speculate like a bunch of names, but who is it? And I feel like that Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano news, and I'm not an MMA guy, it really was big. And it was bigger than these things. It had a bigger ripple than this.
Yeah, my last show, I'll send it to you and you watch because I had James Wormy. He was executive director for the UFC under SEG and also the first, I want to say, 7 Zuffa shows. I think maybe longer than that. I forgot exactly. I should know because he's been on my show so many times. But we talked about this specifically, and one thing that I found interesting is this distinction between the two. UFC signed with Paramount, not for growth. They did it for the money. Because Paramount only has like 79 million subscribers, or total 79 million subscribers, total globally. As to where MVP, 325 million on Netflix. They're going for viewers. They're not trying to cash in necessarily. This show with Ronda Rousey and Gina Carano will probably be the most watched American MMA show in history just because of how many subscribers Netflix has. Netflix has 81 million US subscribers. Okay, so only like maybe 4% need to watch it to eclipse UFC's Khabib versus Conor, which was like, I think 3.5 or 4.5. And a lot of people watch Netflix just sitting doing nothing. They're sitting at home and they turn it on. They might see the big advertisement. Like when I went on TikTok after Jake Paul fought Anthony Joshua, I noticed there were all kinds of women that had discovered Anthony Joshua overnight. Like, this guy's so handsome. This guy's so much. Like, they just turned on Netflix. They weren't boxing fans. It was on there. The background of the Netflix was Paul versus Joshua. When you turn it on, the background of your thing when you turn on Netflix was Paul versus Joshua. And they clicked on it. And that's all it was. And that's what people do when they're home. It's almost like cable TV, Netflix. So I think a lot of people end up watching it that have no interest in Ronda Rousey or Gina Carano. And I think that's going to be huge for them, like you said. And there's no American MMA promotion, or maybe no promotion ever, that their first show had this much buzz. Their very first foray into MMA had this much hype.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's like
Not even close.
well, just it's interesting because it's like it feels like all the rules of combat sports are being thrown out the window. Like for boxing, all the social norms are being changed. And it's quite delightful because a lot of these rules I think were unhelpful. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see it, but I also feel like I saw a lot of people being like, I'm shocked and I'm can't believe Conor Benn did this. And for me, it was like, yeah, I mean, it happens. And it's like we've seen this guy like have fights canceled and not apologize to undercard fighters, when they needed the money. And, you know, it's not like this is a guy that I think we think of as like a first ballot, honorable citizen, So, I mean, it's not like, I don't know. To me, this was like a big non-issue. It's more of like sometimes media, and maybe I'm guilty of this, do like grandiose things about how big something is, and the world's going to be just fine. And I feel like this is a moment where it's like, yeah, it's a fighter. He's valued pretty highly for what his skill is, and he made a signing. It is what it is. Like, and I just think it shocked a lot of people. And now we're getting the Eddie Hearn sad videos, and I
Yeah,
think life will
did
be
he
okay.
put this over by doing that? The old wrestling term, put this guy over. Did he do that by acting the way he did?
Um, I don't know. I just think that like it's just the world we live in. I think is you get some like because this will probably happen to me one day, right? And we'll be talking and you'll have me on and something will happen and it'll be scintillating and I probably shouldn't be talking about it because I'm emotional. And then you just say something. And that's the nature of kind of like what we live in. Like there's too many people with video cameras that have access to everybody that sometimes in the heat of the moment you just say things because people come up to you and they have large followings and it's probably greatly beneficial to get your side out, but you haven't really thought through what you were going to say. And I think it's just an instance of that where it's like, Eddie probably found out the news not long after he did a video, and it is what it is.
Well, I saw one video where he said he had known about a week prior that it could be possible this was going to happen. But, he's usually pretty calculated about what he says. And if I was him, being that I'm a competitor, or at least that's what I plan to be, that I don't want to sell this too hard. That's something that hurts me. I could say, oh yeah, he went. I couldn't pay him this. That would have been the perfect response. I would have liked to kept him, but I can't pay him 15 million for one fight. I'm not going to do that. That would have been, I think, better because then you're like, yeah, I lost a guy, but I can't pay him this, or I'm not going to pay him this.
I think that there
You know?
genuinely is a level of hurt there
Yeah.
to a certain
Oh, of
extent.
course. But you don't
And
want to show it because now you're saying, oh man, Zuffa stuck a dagger in my chest. You know what I mean?
yeah, no, I get it. I just think that, that's love Eddie or hate him. One of the things people like is he has a connection with talking and with the fans. And I think he just kind of said what he felt. I think that it's going to be an interesting time because, look, there's going to be guys that sign with Zuffa and then go to other promoters and aren't high on him. There's going to be guys that sign with Zuffa. It's very much like when the PBC came out and was signing a bunch of people and had a bunch of dates. And we'll see how it goes. But I just don't. Boxing's so messed up. I find it hard to believe that one entity with a lot of money could fix all the problems in boxing because I just don't think people understand from the outside looking in how many grudges there are in boxing and how many people want to gatekeep things and how many people will just be a nuisance to really, and also the fan base. Like they haven't won the fan base over as something that they want as a shepherd of the sport. And that's an issue too, because like imagine if I'm a boxing guy, I come into MMA and I'm bringing my boxing holier than thou principles. The MMA fans wouldn't want me in charge of their sport. So I think there is a level of like you've got to earn trust too with the fans, not just as they're gatekeeping in the sport, but like I think people overlook that the fans do have a voice in this.
Yeah, no, I did want to ask you this, and I don't know if there is a win necessarily, but what would be a win in this signing scenario for Zuffa? Is it just one fight that goes well, or does it need to be more than that?
I mean, a win for Zuffa Boxing this year is getting their fights relevant and
No,
having
this one
them.
fight, this one signing, I mean.
Oh, a win for this would be, to me, if it's me, is that you sign another fighter and they have an amazing performance against Conor Benn. And then Conor Benn may or may not continue in this series of fights. But now you've built up this guy as this big star, and you have a fighter that you're really interested in, beats him, and they move forward. And that would be the win. Would be I look at Conor Benn as someone who's a guy who's a high level gatekeeper to superstar fighters.
So you don't think Zuffa signed him with the intention of him being a backbone of what they're doing?
I would be very nervous if he's the backbone of what they're doing, because I just don't see the talent component there, and that's very, very risky. But if, yeah, I mean, I'm not an executive, and like I'm basically just a fan sitting on a computer. But I wouldn't. I mean, I genuinely don't think he's a top 10 fighter in his division. So, you know, and I think there's a lot of fights that are 50-50 fights for him that are not even $100,000 level fights. So, I think there's a big fight on the horizon, whatever that big fight is. I think the big thing for him is he's able to connect with a lot of fans, and he can make for really, really exciting fights with fans. So I think the big thing for this signing would be he's probably going to have a good win, or he'd take a big fight. And then I think that it would be putting him in a position to make a lot of money, but fight guys that he's probably not qualified to beat.
But maybe they could bring like Teofimo Lopez in and have him fight him or something like that.
Well, that's a real fight. I think that's like a 50-50. The fight I'm kind of looking at is him and Shakur Stevenson. They teased that. Shakur probably wins that. Keyshawn Davis is another fight you could look at. Devin Haney's another fight you could look at.
Those you think Zuffa would sign those guys?
I don't know. I mean, these are just fights that I'm just throwing out there that are winnable fights, right? But like, would you favor him against any of those guys?
No.
Right? And then you could move up and you could say guys like Virgil Ortiz, Boots Ennis, they could fight him at 54. But it's a big name, right? He's going to be, this is the big signing on a win streak, he's feared guy. And then some big guy comes in and then it's like, whoa, he just beat the title holder or whatever. So I think that whether intentional or not, that's going to be the trajectory of Conor Benn's career, in my opinion.
Because I don't think Conor Benn is signing with Zuffa Boxing expecting to be that. He's expecting to be. Although it is a one-fight deal, I would assume he's expecting to be a guy who does something, not a guy who's going to get his butt kicked by somebody else.
Well, and that's good because, look, all boxers need to enter with ambition, the same as MMA fighters and everything. You need to enter the sport with ambition and the belief that you can win. If you don't have that, then you're in the wrong business. Making a janitor makes as much as many 4 to 6 round fighters being a janitor, and it's a lot less dangerous, right? So you could do many other things. As I just said, I'm a big talent person, right? So you have to enter the equation with a certain level of skills. And he, even in his prime, and we haven't, so I just don't see it. I think that he signed with hopes of a certain fight. That fight will probably appear within the next month or two, maybe even sooner. But like when guys sign for this, they're more than likely signing with hopes of landing something that's consequential. And the money doesn't just come from a money tree. So there has to be something of consequence that's out there to justify throwing a lot of money at him. It can't just be like, we're going to just go and try to stick it to Eddie Hearn. Like there has to be something that's consequential that moves the needle that's out there. So it has to be one of these big name fighters. It has to be some big name fighter. And that'll probably shock people, whoever it is.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on the whole MMA media, like you're saying, where they're saying, this is huge, and this is a shot across the bow at Eddie Hearn, You're kind of like, not necessarily, even though optics-wise, it looks like Hearn just lost somebody really important.
But that's the great thing about boxing and like anything, right? I like golf. I like boxing. I like many sports. Okay, you lose a guy, hold good competitions, and then someone else emerges. So it's like, yeah, they lost a guy, but now it's a great opportunity for guys like George Liddard and Jimmy Sands and these other up and comers under Eddie's roster to really take a stand and jump up there and become impactful players. So I think that goes back to, I wouldn't just say it's MMA media. To those that think it's a big deal, it goes back to that pro wrestling stuff with the WCW and the WWF, because I notice there's a pro wrestling tie-in with a lot of these guys,
Yeah.
and they're remembering when like Mr. Perfect went to WCW, and not to joke, but it's like they're kind of getting caught up in their childhood and stuff like that. And it's not really that, it's not the same, right? This is not, those were scripted athletic competitions. This is like a 3-year window to maximize profit margins for boxing in fights that don't necessarily have to have a narrative. And I think the problem is some people are entering with their own fascination with other things and putting narratives that might be as simple as, I can make more money here. Cool, I'll do it. And I think that's kind of like one of the things I'm seeing early on.
Yeah, the other thing is when you pay a guy that much, how are you going to make money off the fight? Especially if you bring somebody in who's significant to fight him, you know? Because
I
he's
mean,
not a massive draw.
we can do the speculative market on that. Just joking around and playing businessman. But I mean, if we were gonna try to do that, which I don't think you could make your money back, I would assume there'd be a big analytics reach. So you'd look at the analytics in certain markets, and then you'd look at where you could build momentum, inroads with a fighter who connects to communities and grassroots places, and maybe centralize a hub to fill arenas. And then, in my opinion, with Ben, I don't see him as a long-term viable option. Maybe then you're looking at who would be the guy that to that marketplace. You know, I think the other, well, I lost my train of thought, but I didn't. Is the great thing about British fight fans is that they can lose, but the fans, if they embrace, there's a romanticism of the everyman, right? So if you're the blue collar everyman, tough man, even if you lose, a lot of British fans will be behind you. Think Ricky Hatton, one of my favorites, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if Conor Benn fits that mold, you could probably get 3 or 4 big fights out of him. And even if he doesn't win, if he puts up a game effort, um, that's a pretty big deal. But I think the big thing for me is, let me do half baked research for you. Like, we don't even know what weight class he's at. Like,
Right,
that's the
right.
craziest thing is like, so let's do the weights. He came in at 159 for Eubank and a little more, 156 for the first fight, 150 for Pete Dobson in 2024, 153 for Rodolfo Orozco, which was a very close fight. And then before that, it was Chris Van Heerden at 146 in 2022. So he's been between 150. Let's see. He hasn't made 47 since April 2022, and he's been fighting between 53 and 60 since 2023. So we'll call it 2.5 years. That's kind of weird, right? That he doesn't have a weight class, you know? So,
Yeah, it's the other thing I wanted to ask you is let me look up because I know I had another thing that I kind of wanted to kick around with you, like is one thing Eddie Hearn has been really big on in these, really ever since Zuffa got into boxing, is he's saying, look, at some point these UFC fighters are going to see how much these boxing guys are getting because Zuffa is going to start paying some of them a lot. And seeing this, everyone knows how much he's getting now. I just saw in Happy Punch where it's at 15 mil and it's got dollars flying around Conor Benn, and I've already seen Sean Strickland, who's headlining the show today, is already commenting about he's not happy with the pay he's getting from UFC. That it's predatory, he called them. This is a predatory company when it comes to MMA fighters. And if they have this revolt, I know at the end of the day, a guy like Ben will make you more money than any UFC guy could, outside of Conor McGregor probably. But is it worth it?
I mean, this goes back to the old unionization of boxing. Boxers could unionize, but that would mean one generation would get screwed out of money because one generation would have to be the people that decide we're going to make less to be icons to help others. And it's not an altruistic sport. You talk to people and it's a lot about how can I get the most money. You get a lot of boxers where they're the main character of their own movie. Very, like, you get a lot of guys that are very self-centered. And I think this is going to fit into that mold too, where yes, people will complain, but I also don't think much is going to change because it's
Because you
like
got
what
guys who are saying, "Look, I'm selling out arenas every time I fight." Alex Pereira is one of these guys at the UFC, and some of these other guys, and I'm not getting diddly squat.
well,
You know.
I'd be curious to get your perspective because I have no sense, right? I have zero sense. The only thing I've seen from this UFC card was Sean Strickland had basically a very ignorant and stupid press conference thing, and it's been floated around by different opinions where they're like, "Look at this guy, it's horrible. Look at this guy, he's saying what he thinks, First Amendment," and it's like that's really not a glowing endorsement of a sport. And I mean, boxing has its own embarrassing things, but sadly, that's the only thing I've seen this week is just this thing that really probably should have been, which I guess that leads to another question I have for you is with a guy like that, right? Where it seems like his brand is I'm on the edge and I'm just going to say things and I'm so uncut and unfiltered. Well, at what point does a streaming service partner go, we don't want to deal with the backlash of this guy? Like when does the line start to go to a certain place with a figure like that?
Well, we'd know if Dana White reacts to it in that fashion, but he really didn't. He came out and said what he usually says, which is, "I'm a free speech guy and I'm not worried about this." Pretty much is what he said. You know, guys here can say what they want. I don't tell them what to say, and that was his line after that. You know, but what I thought was interesting, Sean Strickland had a press. He had an interview before this announcement was made. The signing was made, I think, the day before, and he was talking about he was already complaining about pay, and he was saying this is a predatory company. We we don't make anything compared to what we should, and especially for how we're getting beaten up and all this, and but he also said, but we're too stupid to do anything about it, and we get what we deserve. But he was already mad, and I'm sure he's not happy now at seeing that they just signed Ben for 8 figures, and he's not even the big star at the UFC. I'm talking about guys like Alex Pereira who are big. They'll sell out any arena they're in. McGregor, if he does come back, they have a few guys that are up there. Not, I don't think they have any major, you know, big time superstars lately, actually, but Alex Pereira is one that most people come out to watch, and Islam Makhachev, some of these guys. But if you upset the apple cart of your bread and butter, which right now is the UFC, because if boxing isn't their bread and butter yet, TKO, is it worth it to do that? I'm sure they weighed that into consideration. They're not dumb people, but I'm just kind of asking your opinion of it.
Well, now I'm going to throw it back to you. What do you think? Like, do the UFC fighters have the leverage? Would they be like, okay, I sell out an arena, I'm not going to fight? If they get shelved, can they do anything?
No, not really. And I think the tough thing for them is their management. All the managers in that sport pretty much work for the UFC. They're not working on behalf of their fighters. So if anyone's going to ask for more money, it's going to be the fighter, not the management. You know, the management doesn't want to help the fighters. All these fighters are pretty much controlled by a handful of managers, and they all work for the UFC. They all answer to the UFC, these managers. They created their own little world, like they're trying to do with Zuffa Boxing, where they control everything, down to the management and all that. And it would take a fighter saying, "I'm not fighting," you know, like Ilia Topuria, another guy who's, I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to go to Zuffa Boxing because he's a very good boxer, at least on the MMA level, yes. And I could see him saying, like, he's supposed to, rumored to be headlining the White House card, and maybe he says, "I'm not going to fight." you just paid this guy X. I've never, I won all my fights by knockout. I'm not fighting. And that would be tough because they probably wouldn't have anybody else to go to, because it was supposed to be Justin Gaethje, Ilya Tapor was the rumor. If they can't put that fight together, it'd be hard for them to put a fight that's all that interesting.
Well, and this is my outside just to jump in like that to cut you off is that that's where the Rousey Carano I think gets interesting for me. Is
Mm-hmm.
like I don't really watch MMA, but it's like it's this White House card. UFC is pretty politically charged right now. Like I think that like especially in the US, like a certain type of political affiliation person feels like they're closely connected to UFC more than ever. And that's supposed to be like a very big moment, I think, for the company. That's this iconic thing. They were this renegade sport. Now they're doing a UFC on the White House. And if that is overshadowed by Ronda Rousey and Gina Carano, that's going to be a thing. If they can't present a better fight than that. I think the one thing that's interesting to me about this is UFC, Zuffa, all this stuff, it's very corporate. And you don't always have the freedom to maybe make the things you really want to do when it's very corporate because it runs through things and it's micromanaged. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to follow with Zuffa boxing is a lot of boxing is unprofessional. A lot of it's like tape and glue, fly by the seat of night. And that's been the issue, right? There's real positives to Zuffa bringing structure and organization, but I do think that corporate will hurt it at times. I'm already hearing pushback against the uniform or what is it called, a kit or whatever, the same
Kit.
thing. Yeah, I'm hearing pushback about that. So I just think it's interesting because like the thing is, and then with their fights in the Meta Apex, you need to have regional fans to give the atmosphere. Boxing, not unlike maybe pro wrestling, part of the appeal is a great crowd. The crowd reacting to shots. That's part of the at home experiences, the dramatics of hearing the crowd, seeing the crowd. That's what made the bubble shows sometimes good and sometimes bad was you didn't have a crowd and you heard the punches, how dramatic they are. But I think what's been jarring for me as a fight fan is the crowd reaction is very dim. It's light. You're not hearing the hooting and hollering and I think that's something that needs to change in the near future.
Yeah. I think the other thing is Ronda Rousey mentioned they came to me. They were UFC, and I'm very confident of this. UFC wanted to do that fight, maybe even at the White House. And Ronda Rousey said they weren't interested in paying anything. You know, she said they came to me, they were trying to get me to come back, and they weren't interested in paying anything. You know,
In the words of the great boxer Kareem Mayfield, the cheddar makes it better.
yeah.
And it's just going to be interesting times, right? Because I think that what's going to happen is somebody, like always, is not going to feel respected. And it's going to be a headache for those that it's their job to run this stuff. And thank God it's not me.
But I do think it's interesting what you're saying because you haven't been following MMA, and you're thinking that maybe this whiteout card with the UFC will be overshadowed by Rousey and Carano because of the viewership of Netflix.
I also think it's just like the people they are. It's like Rousey is someone that I meet women boxers who got into the sport because of her, a tough, empowered woman. And then I think Carano, I think there's less people in this era that saw her fight, but she went on to be a movie star. And during Rousey's run, she always spoke highly of her. So if anything, she's like this mythical creature, mythical person that a lot of people have no connection with at all. That I think is people are fascinated. How good really was she? We know that she's a pioneer. We know that she was important, but they have no idea. So I think there's like you have Rousey, who was a cultural phenomenon, and you have Carano, who basically was the spiritual inspiration. And now they're meeting on this very accessible platform. And by the way, they're going to move the needle with every event. There's going to be talking points from each one. It could be outfits, it could be quotes. There's going to be a lot of stuff, and it's going to seep into the world. I'm not sure the White House, like the players in the White House card outside of Conor McGregor, can get that same type of traction where it gets to me when I'm just reading the newspaper.
Do you think they might need another big swing on the card in general, or no, for this Netflix thing?
I'm curious to see what the card is. I'm curious, right? Because do you think they try to do an MMA card, or do you think they do a one off where there's just an MMA cage and then you run a boxing undercard?
No, no, it's going to be an MMA show from what I understand. And Jake Paul's
Okay.
done a lot of work with MMA fighters. Nick Diaz he fought, Tyron Woodley he fought. So it's not like he hasn't fought some MMA guys.
Yeah,
Dylan
it seems
Dennis, his brother fought Dylan Dennis in a boxing match, and
okay.
Dylan Dennis is a lightning rod type person.
Yeah, I mean, I
He
think it
tends to
is.
have a lot of problems at his press conferences always, or
Yeah,
his weigh-ins always break into mayhem.
Jake Paul knows he's like organized chaos. He knows how to get the people that move the needle. So I probably won't watch this card. I think it's going to be unescapable to see the highlights of it. But I think it's going to be interesting because I think that there's going to be a direct compare and contrast to this. And I think it might tug at the heartstrings of nostalgic UFC fans if you get veterans that people used to love and seeing them compete and presented in a certain way. It's interesting, man. There's a lot of interesting things going on. And
And Amanda Serrano has 3 MMA fights, and she's with MVP. I don't think she'd stop boxing to do another one unless the money was good. But
or the opponent was
obviously, she'd be
perfect.
you know, she'd be appealing for people to watch. She obviously was. I think when they had the Katie Taylor fight, there's a lot of people that watched that because it was on Netflix. You know, I think if it wasn't on Netflix, it wouldn't have been nearly as successful as it was. You know, but because it was on Netflix, it was hugely successful.
So I'm going to throw one more thing at you is part of what I think's hurt the UFC is it used to have more of an edge. Like it was on these novelty like Spike TV, it was Mansers and then UFC. It was more of like a renegade sport.
Yeah.
And as you've seen people that are more well-rounded and treated it like a sport, you're losing like the Cabbage Carreras and like I feel like people were drawn to like these kind of
That's
like
funny.
reckless or like Leota Machida. He's like like the karate guy. It was like more like a living version of Street Fighter, right? It was like we watched Bloodsport the other night. It was like the Kumite, right? You're watching like specialists, and as you get away from the specialist, I think that there was like a lack of interest to a certain degree, and it could be watering down the market. It could be,
Mhm.
you know, the sport got global, which is the downside of the global. I do think that like when things get bigger, it's harder to follow it. But it does feel like part of the charm, at least maybe for me when I tune in, was this is a guy who just can box. Can he stay away from the wrestler? And the more it got away from like, okay, here's two really good athletes, it felt like some of the intrigue was gone. And I'm wondering if Jake Paul can almost capture some of that, where it's
Mm.
like more of that old school feel, whether it's just the names. But like I'm gonna be curious if he kind of tugs on nostalgic fight fans with that.
I think a guy could get is Ngannou because his contract with the PFL's up. So maybe he could get Ngannou on the card and have him smash somebody. You know, he did gain some fans by boxing. That could be intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, Ngannou is one of these guys where it's like I had no clue who he was, and he had a good fight with Tyson Fury, and it was kind of annoying to the extent because it was pretty clear Fury didn't train, didn't take it serious. And then like Joshua does what you'd expect Fury to do to him, and then it's like it's over, like
Yeah.
it's just that experiment's over. And I have no assessment of him, like
Yeah, it's
none. It's
interesting.
it's like he's an 0-2 boxer. It's obvious he can do some things, but it's like you don't get reasonable opinions on him. It's like either he's like the uncrowned champion or he sucks. And it's pretty clear he's neither. But he's one of those guys where I have no idea. I remember that I had a buddy, Xavier Zigny, and he sparred him when he first got to Vegas, I want to say. And I'll always remember that because he was telling me about him as some UFC. I guess he was probably in the UFC at the time, but he was telling me about that guy, and I always remember him. So there you go. There's a
What did he
boring
tell you?
anecdote. Just that there was just this big guy, just big guy because Xavier's like 6'7",
Mm-hmm.
so there weren't that many big guys, and he had sparred with him, and just kind of a thing. He was like watch out for him and whatever, but I never really saw it with him. But I don't see it with boxing. I see it. I'd like to say with MMA, I don't see it. Like I remember they used to send me to these Bellator events, and I can tell you who I thought this guy was going to be a star or whatever. I'll give you his name. I think it's Carrington Banks. That might be it. And I was like, yep, the jet setter Carrington Banks. And I'm like, this is a really promising guy, good pedigree. I think I see it. And he's like 10-2 and didn't fight after a certain point. And it's like, I don't have a good eye for it. And I don't really know what's going on. And I get bored and I just want to leave. It's just not for me. This is the way probably I'd assume 90% of MMA fans feel when they watch boxing. They go, oh, I've heard people go, oh, it's boring, it's slow. And for me, I like the slow pace. When everything's going all crazy and crap, I don't know what's going on. They're putting them in chokeholds and stuff. God, no. So, I don't know. But yeah, he just told me he was a good fighter, big fighter. And then, urban legends and stuff. But he was pretty inaccessible early on in Vegas. He was not around many people.
One thing I always felt Zuffa Boxing should have done when they very first came out, but I was thinking this way based on an upstart, not an event that was going to sign big names. Being an upstart, I would have just put him in the UFC gloves right from the beginning. Because like I've been watching these. There's a show called ONE FC, and they have some of the best Muay Thai fighters on the planet in this event. And they have them fighting in the little gloves, not in the boxing gloves like they normally would in Thailand. And the fights are incredible. Some of these fights are amazing, because they're super high level guys. And it's harder for them to block some of these punches. It ups the danger factor a little bit, because you have smaller gloves. You're still doing striking, you're still doing boxing or whatever. And the hands come into it a lot more than they would in a Thai fight. Thai fights, it's mostly kicks and knees. They're not really known to have great punching, but they're getting better because they're fighting in these smaller gloves. There's more openings. And these fights have been amazing. I watched one the other night, this guy Shadow versus Nico Carrillo in ONE FC. You can go watch it on Amazon Prime. It's their last event. Amazing fight. Unbelievable. You don't really have those fights in the UFC anymore because they really don't have guys that come from a championship background in any martial art, as to where these guys are multiple time champions in Muay Thai or whatever, So they're already like laser sharp in their technique.
Well, I think that's my favorite version of the UFC is where you have like martial artists who might be down on their luck or need some money, and they're taking the show on the road to compete in a fighting tournament. And when it got uninteresting was like, it's like, let's get various wrestlers from across the world who are just really, really strong. And they have like enough skill to do other stuff. But if you're not able to counteract the wrestling, that's what like, I liked it when it was a funky, like a funky group of like fighting misfits. And the more professional it got, like the more it became less interesting, I'd say.
Getting back to boxing, I want to get this from you because you're a guy who knows boxing really well. I'm just kind of talking about this because it involves Zuffa Boxing, so it's kind of on my radar, this signing. because I've been paying a little more attention because of Zuffa. It's something to talk about that kind of is MMA related in a way, Zuffa. But I want you to tell me, okay, this is what Matchroom is right now, or this is what Matchroom is as a promotion, and kind of tell me, do you think it's going to affect them that much, or how do you think they can compete against this now that you got Turkey Al Sheikh involved in the Zuffa project? How does Matchroom combat that, or can they?
Well, they're doing a good job, right? They put on Andy Cruz, Raymond Muratalla, which is a good fight. Emmanuel Navarrete, Eduardo Nunes. Matchroom is known for putting forth a high quality product. Zuffa Boxing is trying to put together a high quality product, but their quality control is mostly regional talent so far. Even at the upper level of the cards, it's been a notable name against another fighter who, they're outclassing. There hasn't really been a main event fight yet where it's felt like a back and forth fight. I think we almost got that with Callum Walsh, but that kind of might speak to something else. But the the thing with Zuffa Boxing is trying to develop its identity and prove that it's a certain quality of competition, and that's what's having growing pains with. Matchroom, Top Rank, Golden Boy, through longevity, have shown and proven a quality competition. And Matchroom just signed an extension or a new deal with DAZN. They got a 5-year deal, so now they have a budget and the track record of putting on world class fights. And they're running fights right now as we talk. They've got a really good fight with Lee Wood and Josh Warrington, and that's a world class fight. So all they have to do really is put on distinguished world class fights, because there's not going to be enough spots at Zuffa to fulfill every world class fighter. And because of that, all you got to do to compete is offer something that doesn't mirror their product in terms of production, but gives fight fans an alternative that's a high quality product that's true to their brand. And I think that people are not looking at this rationally. They're coming in with baggage of either, oh, they're doing it, these are the smartest guys in the room,
Yep.
or they're saying, I hope that doesn't happen. And I think all it's going to do is just create more opportunities to see fights that are accessible, and the quality of the cards have to get better on both sides, right? I think Zuffa also has to start putting forth some fights that I think move the needle. I think that they've had some good fights. Hot Rod versus Gvozdyk was a good fight. That fight with Abel Mejio and the guy that beat him, the Hawaiian, that was a good fight. But they haven't had a fight where I feel like people have been waiting to see this bout. Like they're waiting all week. I feel like the bouts sneak up on you. And even Jai Opetaia versus Brandon Glanton, it's a good fight, but I don't feel like people are going to be waiting all week. So Zuffa really needs that scintillating matchup, whereas Matchroom needs the consistency to just consistently show we're a top tier product. This is what you get when you get our shows.
You don't think they need to, because Zuffa's out there, that they won't go up, like elevate their game, or do you think they're going to kind of stay doing what they do?
Well, I think that like competition, like Zuffa is going to scare everyone, right? But I also think Zuffa at a certain point is going to go, wait, why aren't we getting more results? We're supposed to have every advantage. So I think what's exciting is, in theory, it should be a very exciting time to be a fight fan, because everyone should be competing. Zuffa has a lot of money and stuff, so they should be putting on really good fights. And I think that there should be competition internally to make the best fights possible. And then on the opposite side, I think guys like Matchroom, Golden Boy, Top Rank, they should work together, PBC, to really make the best fights, so then they could really offer a viable alternative. So I think all it does is it should breed good competition. And if it doesn't, it just shows you how screwy boxing is.
Well, what's to stop them from maybe buying not Matchroom, but maybe Top Rank or PBC? That's more of what a Zuffa would do in MMA.
Well, that's a fascinating argument, but I mean, I think that comes down to who's in charge and tradition. Now, that would be a shocker, right? That would be the shocker that a lot of people would say with Conor Benn. because that would say some of the old guard would not be gatekeeping the same way they would. Boxing's been a sport of gatekeeping, and that would be different, right? Because I feel like boxing is one of these weird things where they'd rather let the ship burn or the ship go down, the Titanic go down, rather than sell it for money because they just don't want to give you that credibility. So that would be a cultural shift if that happened.
Yeah, instead of I gotta buy talent, I'll just buy the buy the promotion outright. Now I have all their talent.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them do that in the past. That's one difference between boxing and the UFC. It could be that there's never been an entity like this, but there's also like I can't emphasize enough how proud people are in boxing and how long they hold on to grudges. Like I can think of one reporter who's hated me for 12 years and he can't even tell you why he hates me, and that's just reporters. Like that's how this is a sport of grudges where people go down swinging. So I mean, I could maybe see it with one thing, but do you think De La Hoya would sell Golden Boy to them? I don't think so. You
He's
know,
having some problems financially. I don't know what his situation is
well,
as far as
that's the
yeah.
X factor, right? But it's like, I, it's just that's the big like that's the one where if that happened, it would start to change my tune because you'd be like, okay, something here is changing the culture. Conor Benn signing, it's like, okay, that's like a decent level talent. I think that at some point they will sign a promotion. The question is, can they get two? Because if they can get two, that can really encroach on the amount of talent that's available. So I would say that they'll buy out one, but the question will be because the thing that they're going up against is they're going up against all the sanctioning bodies and they're going up against other promoters. And the stronger they get, the more I think rival promoters and sanctioning bodies are going to become friends and they're going to pool their resources. So it's not going to be a super easy task. It's going to be very political and it's going to be very, very difficult.
You know what they could do in response to the sanctioning bodies and the rival promoters is we're going to become one entity ourselves.
I mean, they could, but going back to boxing, people just don't get along that well. Like, this is a dysfunctional sport. So
But when
they
it comes
might,
to survival, and you're up against someone that has a lot of money, like Turkey, maybe they could say, okay, we'll for our survival, we'll make one entity. We'll figure out how we can all get paid, you know, and
I
then
just
go
don't see
forward.
people, I don't see people doing that. I could see people doing one offs, but I just don't think people get along well enough to do it in the long term. I think they do one offs. I just think that it's just going to be an interesting, complicated matter, and it'll probably be a really good book written by someone one day.
Let me ask you one other thing about the belts. I saw Eddie Hearn saying, well, like I think it was the IBF maybe. He's saying you should just tell Jai we're not going to put our belt on the line because Zuffa doesn't want it. They're not going to do anything for us at this fight anyway. They're not going to bring us in the ring. They're not going to acknowledge we're here. They probably won't even show our belt. Why not just say we're done? You know, have a nice life. Go fight for the Zuffa belt. We're out. You know, he's
I
saying
think
that'd be a big thing where instead of waiting for it to go like this, which it's inevitably going to, just go like this right now. You know, any of these guys that fight in Zuffa, they're not welcome to any of these other belts.
I think it's a big waiting game, right? So I think that everyone's waiting to see because Jai is the first big Zuffa fight. We've had Zuffa fights, but that's the first one where it's like, okay, this is a marquee signing. So that's the first fighter who's a pretty big name. I'd say a lot of people say he's the number one cruiserweight. He's one or two. We don't know if it's him or Zordo, and make a case for Benavidez after that. He's one or two. That that fight is going to tell us a lot, right? Because if the belt is gone after that, and then yeah, I mean, there's just a lot to unpack there, but I think that the whole belt, the whole belt infrastructure is going to be interesting. And the issue Zuffa is going to initially run into is you're going to have champions, but essentially at least one or two are not going to be distinguished. They're not going to be as highly acclaimed as these other belt holders with the organizations. And then how do you say it's a credible belt, right? It just feels like they're introducing a belt far too soon. It feels like that the belt shouldn't even exist for a year or two. That there should be some figuring out what this is going to look like, and then the introduction of a belt.
Now, last thing I want to ask you about, I should ask you about it. I was wanting to, just didn't, conversation didn't work at the time, but Conor Benn in England. I think Eddie Hearn is winning the court of public opinion. A lot of guys are trashing Conor Benn from what I've seen. British podcasters and really trashing him for what he did to Eddie Hearn. Is that going to hurt? Like if UFC tries to go, because obviously that's where you'd like for him to fight, I would think. That's probably where you could get the most people into an arena to see him. And he's getting smashed in the court of public opinion by his own people, let alone American fans. Is that a problem?
No, they'll show up just to ask him questions and monetize the content. It won't be.
No, I'm saying fans, normal
the
fans
fans
from that area that are pissed, at what he did to Eddie Hearn.
I don't think so, because I think as long as people are talking, people are interested. It would be worse if no one cared. So as long as there's some traction, if you're out there getting noticed, that means your name's out there, and that means someone will be interested in seeing you. Where it's really bad is when you have 900 or 1,000 views on a fight preview video and it's the week of the fight. That's when you know you're kind of in trouble, or when you're not trending the right way analytics wise. It'll be fine. It'll be what it is. Maybe it takes a little hit, but I think that there's going to be an excitement to see what it looks like with Conor Benn and Zuffa. I think that at least initially, and like I've said before, I don't see him as one of the top guys. So there's always going to be an issue with him to a certain degree. And he's an exciting fighter because he's limited. So limited guys tend to have flaws.
Yeah.
And he's going to have fun fights. So I think that it's just people are very passionate, and all of us are, right? We love boxing, we love MMA, we love the sports. So we have opinions. We're very strong opinions. And we have highs and lows, but we love the sport. So when if he does fight in the UK, people are going to be really excited. They're going to go, okay, let's see what this looks like. This is like a mourning period. This is a grieving period. But I don't think that it'll hurt him, because I think the excitement of seeing a live boxing match for many fans will trump initial anger.
How do you feel about it, though? Eddie Hearn gave him, obviously, paid a lot of his bills and stuff, apparently. At least that's what's being said. And, yeah, how do you feel about that? Like a guy, because most boxers, they may leave their promoter, and the promoter's never really done anything for them besides promote their shows, and they fight for them. But Eddie Hearn, he spent a lot of money on him personally, when he was going through his controversies and whatnot. How do you feel about that, him leaving in that scenario? Because that's a little bit different.
I've had personally a bunch of bad situations. I've been screwed over so much in boxing. I've been lied to and all this stuff. So I'm not surprised, because I've seen all types of crap. I've seen all types of things. So for me, I have no emotion, because I spent much of the last decade driving up Central California, going on road shows and club shows, and I've seen just about every type of weird thing. So I'm probably one of the worst people to ask, because I have no emotion towards boxing at this point. It's something I love. It's something I feel I deeply understand, but I've been used and abused. I've had horrible experiences and the very best experiences. I've had the very best experiences with Herb Stone, and I've had very bad experiences with people I won't name, where it's like you'd get asked to do all this stuff for free, and then the one time you try to get one thing back, you get screwed. And it's
Mhm.
like, so for me, when I see this, this is just boxing. Like, this is, you're in boxing long enough, you run into a story like this. And like I said before, I never looked at Conor Benn as a saint. You know, he had a fight card canceled, and you could say whatever you want to say about why it was canceled, but it was canceled. And there were issues of accountability he needed to take, and he never once apologized. He was always a friggin' victim. It was always people were too mean. There was never accountability. So you're meaning to tell me someone that never took accountability for even the slightest inconvenience to other fighters that made less to him might do something like this? No, it doesn't shock me. It doesn't shock me at all. It's pretty on brand, to be honest.
Yeah, and why do you think Eddie Hearn made that mistake? Because he should know himself that you can't count on loyalty. But he does talk about it a lot, and I'm a little bit surprised because he seems like a really sharp guy that he would count on that when you're talking about Conor Benn or even Anthony Joshua or some of these people. I saw him saying Anthony Joshua's not like Conor Benn. He's cut from a different cloth. I don't know. Money a lot of times can change that. Even if you think
It,
they're loyal.
this, I don't know. I think that I was thinking about this the other day, and I made a video about it that basically no one watched, but that's fine. Um, and it was about like a fighter I was thinking of in particular, and like 10 years ago, yeah, 10 years ago, I was with him, and I was with him a lot, and I'm around him, and I remember going to the gym, and I'm like, okay, it's gonna be the next 20 years of my life. Like, I'm okay with this. This is gonna be cool. And then, you just start to differ, and not to make a boring story for your listeners, but you go different ways, and it's okay to go different ways. But sometimes you go different ways and you don't realize you're going different ways. In that instance, it was painfully obvious. And now I think within the next 4 years, people will never even know unless I bring it up that I was ever around that fighter because it's been so long, right? And at one point, that was my main connection to boxing. And my only thought would be sometimes, maybe as a promoter, you go through the highs and lows, but you don't see that the paths you are going are different. Or sometimes you don't understand that the relationship might be a business relationship and it might be social, but it's strictly business. And I think, especially for British people with their fighters, fans, etc., there's a closeness about being from the United Kingdom. There's a blind spot for them around British fighters. And I think that's all it is, but it's just a good learning lesson. And it adds a little tension, right? And boxing needs animosity. Boxing needs bad guys, right? So it's like stuff like this every now and then is good. We don't want to be rugby. We don't want to be clean cut. We don't want to be golf. You need a bad guy every now and then. You need someone that you don't like, and it's fine. It's okay. Life will move on.
Well, again, Luke, I want I want to thank you for taking the time to do this. I really wanted to get your perspective, because I have a lot of MMA guests, but that's a different kind of perspective, and I wanted to get kind of. I'm always fascinated to hear like your insights into boxing outside of like, to me, fights are fights. To get insight to something else is important, and special and unique. So I'm grateful to get your insights into what you think of this. The fights will happen. It's just the insights are more interesting to me.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure. Everyone that made it this far, be sure to subscribe to this channel. It's a wonderful channel where you can get a bunch of good content, and it's been really fun to talk with you.
Yeah, tell people where they can find you because, like I said in the beginning, and I was serious. I'm not saying that because he's on my show. Um, if someone was building like their own little entity, like your own one he was doing, and to bring a boxing show on, he would have been, at least in my opinion. The reason I brought him on my shows is because I saw him doing stuff that I thought was really good. It wasn't because I knew him, and So I think when it comes to boxing, people that give their insights, and you heard it on this discussion, I think he's up there. He's way up there. And so yeah, tell people where they can find your stuff because I think it's excellent. That's why you were on my shows to begin with.
Well, respect takes decade, and appreciate your real kind words.
Yeah.
Lukie Boxing on Substack. I do a bunch of different things, reactions. I got a YouTube channel, and I'm a contributor to the Big Boxing Scene website. So I write like little interviews, preview pieces there. I have the newsletter, which is really great if you're a casual boxing fan, I'd like to say, because I do a fight preview, kind of a schedule for the fights to watch for. I do a boxing results recap. So if you want to catch up on what happened, I go from big to small. You can tune out wherever you want. And then I do something called the Once a Week podcast, which is basically a mailbag between the newsletter and my YouTube channel where I respond to questions throughout the week, which is basically turned into me doing film study. So if any of those sound interesting to you, just kind of maneuver around the internet and you'll essentially find me. And if you can't, I'm on X at Big Dog Lukey, and then I can just share with you some links of my stuff.
Well, Luke, again, I appreciate you taking time to do this, and fascinating insight as always. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Take care.
Yeah, everybody watching the episode, we appreciate it. Until next time, see you later.